as many of you will remember, we used to have an installation that we did pretty much every fall, winter, spring called the Bison Gallery that presented a bunch of artwork of bison and told a number of different stories, from the decimation of the herds to Native American hunting methods to just the beauty and reverence that we all have for the bison, to the sadness that people felt once we had killed all the bison. And so it was a nice exhibit that we did for many, many years. And a few years ago, we decided to mix it up and take one component of that and expand upon it and create the Conservation Gallery. So the bison has been a part of the Conservation Gallery installations every single time. And so that's what we put in the Bison Gallery, just as an effort to do something different and also to expand the kinds of stories that we were telling. And this exhibit does that similarly, but in a different way. This expands what we talked about in the Bison Gallery to talk about the plains in general, and to talk about the other creatures that lived on the plains with the bison. So you can still get, I think, almost every single story that you told in the Bison Gallery into this exhibit, but it also offers a lot more and offers a much broader picture. So some technical things before we start off. We did not do a lot of extended label copy in here. So most of the labels you see are just the tombstone labels. There is an artist statement from Catherine Turner in the Bison Gallery. There's a description of the Gerritsen drawings in the Changing Visions Gallery. And then, is there any other extended ones in here? I don't think so. So instead what we did was we created two guides that you can take around with you. This is a species guide, not necessarily an art historical guide, but it talks about different conservation facts about all the different species, or most of the different species that are in this exhibit. This could also be something of a seek and find, because there are a lot of tiny thumbnails of images on here. And all of these artworks are in the exhibit in one of these three galleries. So this was based on a lot of research our intern Tammy Hanwalt did this summer. Similarly, this amazing timeline that was the brainchild of Bronwyn Minton and Terry and everybody from education. Tammy, this summer, came up with a bunch of great facts on a timeline, and so we've translated those into this great visual graphic. They mostly tell facts about pronghorn, bison, wolves, prairie dogs, and there's a couple black-footed ferret-related ones down at the other end. A nice intro label, and then if people don't know what the Great Plains are, this is a kind of a truncated map of the Great Plains because they go up into Canada, but this is basically the Great Plains, and divided into short grass, mixed, and tall grass prairies as you go across. And this is the primary habitat, was the primary habitat of the bison and all these other creatures. So we wanted to show and get people to realize the diversity of life on the plains that once existed and that has the chance to come back, and that is in fact coming back. If you remember the great Michael Forsberg exhibit, photography exhibit that we had a few years ago, one of his main points was the Great Plains is full of more life than you think it is. Yeah. So there are lots of these creatures that exist on the plains today, just in much smaller numbers, obviously, than they did in the past. So that's one kind of way to think about this exhibit. And the other is to think about it in terms of the bison and how important it is in American culture, and that narrative that you are all familiar with, because I think I've described it many times, and you're all through your own research. But there used to be 30 to 60 million bison on the Great Plains. once Europeans started moving westward, that number declined. You also get artists moving across into the West and then coming back and recording what they've seen. And the bison was a huge, huge subject. But as we show in here, so were these other creatures that inhabited the plains with them. This is a great painting that you can come around and look at that hasn't been out very often, if at all, by Howland, who was a Colorado-based artist. And it's a very sweet painting of a buffalo. It's called Monarch of the Plains. And when you think of that name, Monarch of the Plains, you think of the bison. And we decided to be clever and call it Monarchs of the Plains and count all of these creatures as monarchs of the plains. So you've got that, and this is a great piece because it shows a little bit of the combination of elements that made the plains such a great place for buffalo. There's the bison, there's the prairie grass, and then there's the prairie dogs. And there were once, I think one of these things says, there were 30 to 60 million bison. There could have been as many as 1 billion prairie dogs on the plains. And so the other thing to think about this is, you know the story of the bison and how those populations have declined, but the same thing happened with prairie dogs, with pronghorn, with black-footed ferrets, with all of the other creatures that live on the plains with the bison. We have some great artworks in here, and I'll walk around and talk about a few of them. And basically, we're going in chronological order. These are the oldest. Then in that gallery is a little bit newer. And then in the Bison Gallery is work by all living artists. So this is a historic view. And there's not great views. There weren't many artists who made it out on the plains when there were 60 million bison, but there are certainly some representations of how that might have looked in here, like this great William Jacob Hayes painting of the prairie fire. So that is a view of what it might have looked like if there were a prairie fire and it had interrupted the progress of a huge herd of bison. They're all running away from it. What's great about William Jacob Hayes is he's a fairly early artist to go up the Missouri River, and he goes up in 1856 or 58, and he's able to see some remnants of life on the plains as it used to be before it was so hugely impacted by European settlement. And we have this great selection of work by him that I don't think has ever been out in this magnitude before. So there are 6 works by William Jacob Hayes, all but 2 of which are of different species of animals. So he really loved to paint different things. We've got pronghorn. This is a kind of a funny bison painting, 1860. And this is 1868, I think, a little bit later, 1869. So he's learned, what's fun about this, he's learned something about how to paint bison and how they look between these two. We know that bison have a hard time looking you in the eyes straight out of their head like that, but he wanted to convey some of that in this painting and was kind of experimenting with how to do that. And in this, you'll notice all the bison are from a side view and look much more like what we think and know bison look like today. William Jacob Hayes, as I said, was not only interested in the big monarch of the plains, he was also interested in pronghorn, in rabbits, in this vast prairie dog colony. And this is, to have somebody in 1856 paint a big canvas of prairie dogs is a really interesting thing. Yeah. What's the market for that, right? Most people want this, they want an elk painting, they want a deer painting. So this is a really special work of art that helps us illustrate the diversity of life on the plains. I don't know, we could maybe find out who he painted this for, but it wasn't a huge thing, prairie dog paintings. It's not a huge thing today. And then the other great thing by William Jacob Hayes is this little painting of the pond. There's snipes and frogs. We looked up every single animal in this exhibit to make sure that they had lived on the plains or currently live on the plains, and that's reflected in this sheet as well. And then this, to complement that, this is a great work by Albert Bierstadt that came out of, it was featured in Collector's Circle a couple years ago and was donated to us that evening. And so there are, obviously tons of butterflies fly through the plains. But what's great about this is a side story, is that if you went to a party at Albert Bierstadt's house, sometimes he would have a little piece of paper and drew a little drawing on it, and then you know how you make butterfly prints in grade school. You fold it together, and you peel it back apart, and there's a butterfly. And if you look at this, you can tell that that's exactly what he did. This is one of the most developed and best examples of this butterfly trick that I've ever seen. He did hundreds of these, and you see them all the time at auction. But this is a really great example, and we're really happy to have it. And this has never been out on exhibit, except for in Collector's Circle 2 years ago. We've got great historic sculpture from Edward Kemys, who's the first American artist to specialize in sculpting animals, and from the guy who followed soon after him, Alexander from Mr. Proctor. This piece has been a favorite for many years, and we used to call this work, the bison sculpture, Monarch of the Plains, until it was discovered that someone made that up along the way, and Proctor called it, Bison number 2 or
Is this the
whatever.
one that the kids were encouraged to touch?
They were, and I think we need to debate that, so I didn't put the please touch signs back out. It's clearly doing some damage to the patina, so I'm not sure if we want to continue.
Yeah, but it's not bad damage, and it's kind of nice damage.
Well, look at the horn and the tail, and that's just going to get worse.
Yeah.
So I think it's debatable right now.
Gives it dimension.
In terms of diversity, of course, one of the people who documented the diversity both of avian life and of mammalian life was Audubon. And so we've got a great Audubon osprey over there, which is, the birds are what he was best known for. And then there's a really nice couple of images over here of a black-footed ferret. Again, you don't see a lot of black-footed ferret paintings. It's not a huge ferret standing on a rock looking out over the wilderness. And a funny little prairie dog. And so what I noticed, I hadn't noticed this before, but if you look at this prairie dog, and then if you look at the prairie dog in the painting that's on the other side of this wall, you might surmise that Howland had a print of this and was using it as a model when he was painting his prairie dogs. Very similar kind of bizarre posture, which might have been, as you all know from your knowledge about Audubon, because he was using a stuffed specimen or a skin or something when he was creating it. These are, looks like John James Audubon. But as you know, his son took up the mammal project after he stopped being able to paint quite as well. And so this is a great grizzly painting by John Woodhouse Audubon, John James Audubon's son. And this bear appears in a print with a female grizzly down below it in the way the print was reproduced, but this is the painting they used for the male. It does. It's not. John Woodhouse was not quite as good an artist as his father. There are 2 great activities in here. Does Jane want to talk about those?
Or Grace, is Grace?
Or Grace?
I'll jump in. So Grace has made these bison mags on there. People want to do that. And then the other, Adam over there can hold up so you can see. But there are 3 laminated pieces that go into more depth on these 3 animals that are so closely tied to each other in terms of ecosystem on the plains. The bison, the prairie dog, and the black-footed ferret. And on the front of each, or I guess front back is debatable, but on one side of each is, did you know, interesting facts. For example, that the bison eats, 30 pounds of grass a day, I think. And on the back, it talks about local presence. So it talks about the Teton herd and how, where those animals came from. They actually came from Yellowstone bison that were brought down and been in an enclosure up in Moran, and then they escaped and became the Teton herd. And it's a fun story about the black-footed ferret that was thought to be extinct, and then for 3 or 4 years nobody had seen any. They were declared extinct, and then a man and a woman who lived on a ranch in Meeteetse, in the middle of the night, they were woken up one night by their dog Shep barking furiously, and they told the dog to be quiet and went back to bed. And in the morning they went out on the porch, and the animal had been feeding out of the dog's dish, and it was killed. And this couple didn't know what it was because they'd never seen one. They took the dead animal that had been poaching out of the dog's dish to the taxidermist, who knew what it was, and showed it to Game and Fish, and it was in fact a black-footed ferret. So the black-footed ferret was not extinct after all. And there were 100, or a little over 100 or so, were discovered on this nearby ranch, living in this big colony, and the scientists watched them for a number of years, and then all of a sudden they started to die off due to, I think it was some kind of plague, or bubonic plague, or so they then took the 18 that had not died yet from the disease, and they put them in captivity. Only people with gloves and suits and masks could go in there and be with them, and they were able to, through captive breeding, bring the numbers back up and slowly reintroduce them to the wild. So in the wild today, there are over 1,000, and that's divided between captive breeding facilities and also places in the wild where they've been reintroduced.
So we'll continue on with bison, and this room has nice bison pictures. This is bison at rest, calm, peaceful. There's that great picture of bison running across the plains. If you transition out of here into the next room, you get into more paintings that happened after we had killed all the bison, and so they're much sadder in tone. So there was a great sense of remorse that we had slaughtered this entire vast population, wasted a national resource, etc. And you begin to get things like this, which is O.C. Seltzer's copy or version of Russell's painting, When the Land Belonged to God. And you've got the sunset, the sun is going down, it's kind of in the twilight, and you've got healthy bison and wolf populations interacting without necessarily the hand of man being involved. There's pronghorn skull down there. So as we move into this room, the paintings change into more remorseful and sad works. You're all familiar with that painting in the corner, which is N.C. Wyatt's How Many Millions One Can Only Guess, which was illustrated in the Saturday Evening Post in 1905, about just what I was talking about. This beginning of an outrage over the waste of this amazing natural resource that we had, which if you had managed it better, that could have been what you used for meat to feed everybody instead of just killing all of the bison that you possibly could. So these haven't been out in a while, but these are fantastic illustration of the history of the bison, a great encapsulation. There's when really there were millions of bison over there, and then it shows the Europeans coming across, building railroads, and shooting buffalo as they went across. Then you get into the hide hunting era, which is, according to this one, 1872, also 1880s. You have these guys down here that are processing the bison for their hides, but then I was looking really closely at this the other day, and these are hunters up on this bluff, and those are little puffs of smoke coming from their guns, and they're all just shooting these bison fairly indiscriminately, so that they can be processed and their hides can be sold. So after this happens, then you have settlers moving in and finding all these bones on the prairie, and even these were a resource. You could sell bison bones, which were used in fertilizer and in making bone china, and then Jane was saying toothbrush handles and all kinds of other home products. So this is a great summary of what we were discussing.
Didn't the railroad and the government collude to hire shooters to go on great hunts, and the railroad was killing the biggest lot of the bison?
The
Because
railroad.
they wanted to control the Indians?
So it was the unofficial policy of the government to slaughter as many bison as possible because that would decrease the Native Americans'
Yeah.
ability to put up any resistance. So this, and I said this morning to some of you, I think, you have the beginning of the reservation era is in the 1830s, 1840s. So as this is happening, yes, the bison are being relocated to reservations, and it's not until you get this kind of scene, again, where everyone's really sad about what happened, that you start to see wildlife preserves being developed. So preserves for wildlife and Native American reservations never developed in concert, when really maybe there could have been a little bit more coordination between those two things. And that's a model that they have used in Canada, and that we talked about when we had the George Catlin American Bison show. But Yellowstone National Park was founded in 1872, in part to protect, mostly to protect that beautiful landscape, in part to protect the animals that lived there. But none of the hunting regulations were enforced very stringently until a decade or a decade and a half later, when the Yellowstone population went down to something like 20 bison. And then people were like, oh my gosh, we have to actually enforce these hunting rules and save this, one of the last remaining wild herds that we have. So, again, that's that whole era where a lot of these paintings come from that are expressing sadness and loss and grief. This is a great example of that. Lone buffalo, this solitary figure looking over this vast landscape where once his family obviously roamed. The landscape's on fire, the sun is setting. It's not a happy scene. That is a great story as well. This little painting by William de la Mantegna Carey, The Lost Buffalo Calf. Could also be called maybe The Last Buffalo Calf. These guys in the background are hide hunters. There's little tiny figures back there that I encourage you to look at. One of the ways that any bison were saved is by these private herds that started to develop. And one of the reasons that was possible is if you were a hide hunter or a person on horseback and you had shot the mother of a calf, the calf would sometimes adopt you as its parental figure and follow you around because it didn't know what else to do. So there was a way of obtaining bison through this method. You could shoot the adults and then the calves would come with you back to camp and then you could corral them. Mm-hmm.
I think it's also interesting the sociocultural and historical context as well, that a lot of those hide hunters were Civil War survivors. So you had all these young men who didn't know how to do anything but kill stuff, and that's who they hired. Right? They were lost and disassociated to completely talk about, post-traumatic stress disorder, and they were prime targets for that work, and were paid well to use the skill that they had developed well during the Civil War.
To get back to the Plains story for a second, there's two pieces here that haven't been out, maybe three, but one of them is behind you, I'm sorry. There. This is when, at auction it was called Lion Attacking a Bison, and I just thought it was a riot because it's not clear what kind of cat that is. Let's say it's a mountain lion. But it's by Georges Dardet, a French sculptor, and so he would have just seen these animals in the zoo and kind of like Barry did, created a battle between these two. If you look at it, it might even be a tiger because he has these big ruffs on the side of his neck. But if you give him the benefit of the doubt and you say it's a mountain lion and a bison that lived in the same place, this could have happened on the plains at a certain point when mountain lions and bison both lived there. The same is true of this, which hasn't been out ever, maybe, at least not in my memory, of grizzly and bison fighting. This could also have happened on the plains because grizzlies did inhabit the plains. And I think in that Michael Forsberg book, he talks about grizzlies coming back onto the plains, mountain lions
You had
coming
that one
back.
image that was motion detected
Yeah.
at night of a grizzly walking on
Yep.
like a game trail, and the camera caught it.
Yep, and the same's true. He either had a mountain lion picture or a bobcat picture. Anyway, there's these predators that are coming back onto the plains. So this is funny. That's kind of crazy, but things that might have happened on the plains. So there's this great grizzly piece that hasn't been out in a long time. We brought out these nice bird sculptures by Clark Bronson because the avian life on the plains is still amazing and very vibrant, migratory patterns. We brought out this Carl Rungus. He called this a phalanx, but it is in fact a bobcat. That's the smaller wildcat, and they were much greater inhabitants of the plains than the bigger lynx. Lynx kind of stay in forests and mountains. Bobcats have a much wider distribution. Then over here, another piece mirroring what we were just talking about. Carl Rungus's Last of the Buffalo. Great O.C. Seltzer painting of a lone wolf, bleak, desolate. People weren't sad that there weren't any more wolves at this point. They were still seen as a pest, but that's a good kind of companion to this piece. And then this work was purchased in Collector's Circle this year.
Okay, I went.
It's a really nice piece. There's one other sculpture by Rumsey in the collection of a mountain lion. And this guy, Charles Carey Rumsey, if you've been to the Buffalo Bill Historical Center, or Center of the West, as it's called now, they have a huge bas-relief of a Native American hunting a buffalo by him. This is probably a study for a frieze that he did on the Manhattan Bridge in New York, which is if you think about the Brooklyn Bridge, goes right here, and then there's this other little bridge that not everybody knows about over here. It's called the Manhattan Bridge. It's kind of Art Deco style. There's this great frieze as you're driving over it of a Native American and bison scene, and this is likely a study for that.
Adam, where is the house or sculpture lament?
It is in back. I didn't want to confuse this by bringing out one image of Native Americans. So it was a debate in my mind. That piece, Wild Harvest, hasn't been out since Wildlife Art for a New Century #1, I think. But that's interesting to talk about introduced species onto the plains. Who knows where pheasants, or what are those other birds? Turkeys? No pheasants. Where do those pheasants come from?
Tucker?
Yeah.
Quick.
China. The pheasants come from China. Were introduced as a game hunting bird in the 1880s, 1900s, and now they're maintained as a population because hunting is so popular on the plains. So in here, all living artists, I am, yes, entirely sure. Well, unless there's a coon.
Bob
So
Coon.
Bob Coon.
Yeah.
I still think of him as being one.
There's a bobcat.
Yeah, there's 2 Bob Coons, and everybody else is still with us. We've transitioned now into a more contemporary realm. There's only one bison in this gallery. This new piece by T.D. Kelsey called The Plainsman. And this is a good time where you might want to talk about or think about that section of the JKM gallery where we talk about the typical male stag painting, and all those works that are called Monarch of all he surveys, Prince of the Domain, whatever regal title you want to give those paintings. This is kind of a counterpoint to that, in that we don't have exactly those kinds of works in here. The Plainsman is maybe one example, but this shows the diversity both of life on the plains, but also of contemporary artwork showing a range of different subjects and species. And so over here we've got whooping crane and sandhill cranes and javelinas and raccoons and squirrels and skunks, and then another amazing prairie dog painting that we were just given from Western Visions that makes a great comment on this whole regal titling, and it is called The King and Queen of Dogtown. So think about that, and as a great, funny, contemporary work, and compare it to Monarch of the Plains in the first gallery, and you get a sense of how far we've come or in what direction art has been moving. The other really great thing over there is an original painting by Burt Raines of a black-footed ferret. He doesn't do a lot of artwork. He took a painting class from Fred Kingwill, and that was one of the results. And that is a promised gift to the museum. So that's very sweet. The other great thing to note is a loan of a work from Catherine Turner, which is over there, which is called Three Matriarchs, I think. And so this, again, is turning the typical lens around and looking at something else and depicting something else, which are females of the species, and talking about their natural behavior, and the way that this artist herself has personally experienced these creatures living in this landscape. So that encapsulates, I think, a lot of this gallery. Jane, do you want to talk about what's in the case?
Sure. So some of you who remember when we used to have the Bison Gallery in this space, we had a case of these objects that we could get out for school groups. And so these are Native American Plains tribe implements made from parts of the bison. So these come in handy if we have a school group. They can sit down. A couple of bison hump bone paintbrushes. So it's a very porous bone. When you think about sponge painting, the way it works is you dip a sponge in the paint and all the little holes or cells soak up the paint. The hump bone is a very similar kind of thing. If you look closely, you'll see it's a very porous bone, lots of little holes. It looks sponge-like. So if you dip it in the paint, it pulls up or retains some of that paint, and then that could be used to paint something like this parfleche container that's made from buffalo hide and is painted in the traditional way with supposedly with plant material dyes. I'm trying to think what else. There's some tendon in there. There's a scapula, which is the shoulder blade, which could have been used as a hoe for digging, or as I had a student one time tell me it looks like a giant ice scraper, and in fact they were used to clean the snow off the teepees before it collapsed from the weight. We have a John Clymer painting that shows a Native American woman using one of these scapular bones to scrape the snow off the side of the teepee so it won't collapse under the weight. So it's pretty nice to have these here. I know Adam wasn't really getting into the Native American part, so we're grateful he was willing to get these out because we have so many requests for those programs having to do with Plains tribes and the bison.
All right, I'll just say a couple more things, and then if there's questions, I can answer some, or we can just go have lunch. These two paintings are really special and haven't been out in a long time. This piece by Robert Bateman was in the retrospective that was at the museum in, what did we decide, 94 or 96?
98.
98. And then was either the property of this family or purchased and made a promised gift to us. And so it's come back just in the last year. This is from the same family that donated the Bun Wolf sculpture that's at the end of the sculpture trail, and that sponsored the two Rungus Islands. So it's from the Hopkins family. And then that work over there was a promised gift from Dick and Jane Johnston. That with the mountain lion. Yes.
Oh,
Yes. Okay. This one right here is from the Johnstons, a very nice promised gift. And who can Camisa is? I'm glad I'm here to help. I had to look that up. So this painting is called Camisa Possibilities. And Camisa is this kind of brush in which these guys, quail, I think, are hiding. So there are possibilities in the Camisa. And we have another painting called Rabbit in Rabbit Brush. So this is similar to that yellow rabbit brush that you see out there. And this too. like the yellow, but just beautiful, beautiful Thomas plant work, and two really nice recent gifts along with that TB Kelsey bison that haven't been on display. So, any questions? Thank you. It was really fun to get all this out and do all the research. We had tons of help from everybody, so it was a group effort for sure. Now we can go have potluck. All right.